Good evening and welcome to my presentation on Chapter 5, Selecting Content and Preparing Instructional Objectives. To start, for the purpose of this presentation, this will be an overview of the topic, and I would like to recommend you go back and read this chapter if you seek more in-depth clarification. Much like the first couple of chapters, this chapter emphasizes the importance of instructional planning. Why? As teachers, we desire a well-organized class that provides purpose for our students, whereby they are physically and mentally on task for the entire length of time they are with you. Within instructional planning, we evaluate the entire semester or academic year, the individual unit within the academic year, and finally the individual lesson within that unit. This is a steady and cyclical process whereby we engage within a reactive and reflective process. The heart of planning is decision making. We must define the goals and objectives, what subject matter will be taught in each of the levels above, the available and age-appropriate materials at our disposal, and the techniques and methods to deliver content that will be most successful and valuable to our students. Planning ensures scope or depth of the covered content and sequence, or what comes before and what follows, is met for the individual differences of each student. This helps ensure you, the teacher, are self-assessing and learning to better the classroom learning environment. Selecting content is often set or guided by the national and state standards within a content area, as well as the school district's adopted standards and printed and non-printed materials. When planning out your year, unit, and lesson, you will want to ensure that the students are getting their guidelines, often referred to as outcome-based education. Adding assessments against goals and objectives constitutes a criterion-referenced education. Students' textbooks are used to enhance learning and are a basis for exploration. The benefits include an organization of important content, including activities and worksheets for suggested progression in learning. Not every student learns in the same manner or reads at the same level. Therefore, textbooks can be a challenge for some students in their path towards learning. In addition, because textbooks are adopted every 5 to 8 years or so, information can be outdated. The future of textbooks and information may be in the form of ebooks or interactive media programs that allow for information to be easier updated. Encourage students to utilize the library and internet. Pamphlets, magazines, brochures, newspapers, journals, and periodicals are also good resources. Regardless of the reading materials that students are using, you should encourage that multi-text and multi-reading approaches be used by students. To ensure students do not get overwhelmed and lost in too much information, guidance strategies should be used to enhance comprehension and higher order thinking. These may include the KWL method, PQRST method, SQ3R, to name a few. Teaching students on how to approach reading the text, as well as how to take notes, is critical for future learning. Please take a minute to write down the web address at the bottom of the screen. This is a great article from a professor at the University of Arkansas who had his master's students reimagine the textbook of the future. The article supports some of the things you see here, as well as interesting takes from a student's perspective. It is important that we address the difference between terms before moving on. Some of you might have experience with these terms in the past. Once an outline has been established about what curriculum will be taught and what resources you will utilize, you should write specific learning targets. These learning targets are known as instructional objectives. Goals and objectives are commonly used interchangeably, but there is a difference. Aims are the most general education objective. For example, the aim of the school is for students to learn. Goals are more specific in that they are targets that teachers would like to accomplish. They are general statements of intent. For example, to develop an appreciation for music. Instructional objectives are more specific in that they are used to distinguish what the students will do. They are actual behaviors students must learn and display. The more specific your instructional objectives can be, the better your planning will be to reflect student learning and vice versa. Simply put, goals guide the instructional method implemented in the classroom. Objectives guide students' performance expectations. The book points out the main purpose of writing objectives in performance terms is to be able to assess with precision whether the instruction has resulted in the desired behavior. The assessment that follows instruction should align with the performance desired. As students perform the competencies dictated by the various objectives, success is considered and is known as performance-based or competency-based education. Mastery learning is the idea that students achieve one set of competencies before moving on to the next set. For example, in a classroom, this would be teaching students their numbers before asking them to do calculus. Performance that can be directly observed, also known as overt behavior, makes assessment easier to match objectives. Covert behavior, or behaviors that are not directly observable, are more difficult to assess. However, covert behaviors are important for some instances. Writing instructional objectives should focus on overt behaviors. Can you teach multiple objectives? Yes, and you should focus teaching simultaneously on multiple objectives to ensure the diversity among learners are met. However, assessments are more accurate when one objective is assessed at a time. Now let's watch a short film on the process of instructional objectives and the components.
How to write instructional objectives. Are you a teacher? Maybe a trainer? Or even an instructional designer? If your role is to help people learn, then you need to know how to write instructional objectives. By the end of this video, you will be able to describe the components of an instructional objective and construct a well-written instructional objective. How do you write an instructional objective? Effective instructional objectives have three parts. The first part of an instructional objective is a condition. A condition is whatever tools, materials, or information is given or withheld from the learner. For example, given a map, or without a calculator. The second part is performance. Basically, it's what the goal of instruction is. Performance is a measurable or observable knowledge, skill, or attitude. For example, locate all 50 US states, or hit a baseball. The last part is criteria. This part is critical because it enables the instructor to determine if the instructional objective was met. Criteria is measured by the accuracy or speed of the learner. For example, without error or in under 15 minutes. Putting it all together. The basic format for an instructional objective is as follows. Given the condition, the learner will be able to perform a skill, knowledge, or ability within the stated criteria. Here's an example that follows this format. Given a map of the U.S., the learner will be able to locate all 50 states without error. Quick recap. Instructional objectives have three parts. The condition, whatever tool, material, or information the learner is given, or without, to perform a task. Performance, an observable or measurable skill, knowledge, or attitude. Criteria, how well the learner must perform to achieve the instructional objective. Now get to writing your own instructional objectives.
Another format for writing objectives, but with the same outcome as the previous video, is the ABCD method, as presented in our book. A stands for audience. In our case, it's students, but you can personalize it by saying, you will. The acronym TSWBAT is often used to abbreviate the students will be able to. B is the ABCD methods stands for behavior. This is the expected behavior or performance and should be written using verbs that are measurable. C and D are often considered to be important parts for the assessment of learning. C stands for condition and is the setting in which the behavior will be performed. Examples include at home in a 2-month period or on a map. D stands for degree and this is the performance level desired for proficiency. Now, not all objectives are written in this order, but will contain all the components. For example, given a specific case study, the students will be able to successfully conduct needs analysis. In this case, the condition is listed first, followed by the audience, degree, and behavior. Classifying objectives starts with understanding a little bit about Bloom's taxonomy. The idea behind classification derives from the complexity of skills and abilities, whereby one's ability to perform at one level requires the ability to function at the previous level. Bloom's taxonomy can be reviewed in depth on page 137. It is most important that you as a teacher be aware that there are levels and that there is a need to move students along from lower to higher levels. The cognitive domain primarily includes the intellectual needs of students. These range from the lower level of simple recall or knowledge and move towards higher levels of comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and the highest level of evaluation. An example of the lower level is the student will name the position of players on a soccer team. Higher level examples could be the students will interpret the reasons for an opposing team's offense use of the different positions of players on a soccer team. The affective domain is the concern with the feelings, attitudes, and values and have levels of basic acquisition to internalizing or demonstrating consistent beliefs that translate into the way of life. The domain range of lower to higher is receiving, responding, valuing, organizing, and internalizing. Lower level examples could be the student listens attentively to the ideas of others. A higher level example could be the student practices accurate verbal and nonverbal communication. Finally, psychomotor domain. This is often the most debated domain. At the lower level of the range, you have simple locomotor motion to more complex. The categories are moving, manipulating, communicating, and creating. Lower level examples could include the student will jump a rope 10 times without missing. A higher level example could be the students will invent and build a kite pattern. Multiple definitions and examples can be found on page 136 to 140. It should be noted that education doesn't always fit into a neat, compartmentalized box like the taxonomies might suggest. In fact, it is noted in the book that often the taxonomies overlap, and there are times when each level of an objective might need to be utilized. However, this provides a guide towards progression. As we monitor both formative and summative assessments based off the objectives, we must ensure that the learning within the domains are connected. Teachers should constantly log students' progressions. Having students logs reflections on their learning will encourage students to be problem solvers and learners who are self-directed. One of the largest debates is what role character education plays in the classroom and how to develop it. Part of the affective domain, these values include things like kindness and respect. Character development is becoming a larger part of schools, whereby curriculum is being developed. Finally, I will read you a quote from the book. To be an effective teacher, the challenge is to use performance-based criteria while simultaneously using a teaching style that encourages the development of intrinsic sources of student motivation, allowing, providing, and encouraging learning that goes beyond what might be considered predictable, immediately measurable, and representative of minimal expectations. Thank you.